I was an elementary school teacher for about 15 years, and one thing I learned about children, very young ones, is that they have no filter. They will say whatever is on their mind, and for the most part, it's true. Unless they fear they may be in trouble, of course. With this in mind, I have heard many, many stories from kids. Some quite alarming and just bizarre. I wanted to share one with you that I remember quite well that has stuck with me all of these years. This was when I taught first grade. There was a little girl that I will call Sally. Sally started class about halfway through the school year, as her family had just moved to the area. I do what I normally do and introduce myself to her outside of the class, and ask if she would like to share something with the class, or just introduce her from her seat. I didn't like to put kids on the spot if they didn't need to be. She asked to do it from her seat, as she was very shy, and it showed. Everyone was very kind when they looked at her and said hi, and some kids even tried to invite her to play with them. She would refuse, however, and would watch them from the side, typically just singing to herself. Finally, we did a team activity, so I did push her a little to intermingle with her classmates, and she actually became good friends with another girl. At one point, while they were at recess, Sally came up to me after scraping her knee and asked to clean it up. I took her into the restroom to get a rag and then back to the classroom, as I kept my own supply of bandages. As I helped her get all fixed up, I asked her if she was liking her class and her new friends. She smiled and nodded at me. I didn't say much else, and then she said a bit more than I expected, and it left me confused. She told me, "At first I was scared because in my last life the kids were very mean to me." I of course just assumed she meant her last school and maybe she had problems there. It was upsetting to hear about because she was a really smart and kind girl, and I couldn't see any reason as to why someone would choose to bully her. So I told her, "I'm sorry to hear that. That wasn't very nice of them, was it?" Then she continued talking. "Yeah, they made fun of me because my mommy was poor and I didn't have a daddy. They threw food at me and pulled my hair and sometimes cut up my clothes." Again, I was thinking that this was awful and it broke my heart to hear it. But I was confused, because I had met her parents, both her mom and dad. Of course, her dad could have been a stepfather, but I don't think he was. They looked way too similar. His mom was also a stay-at-home mom because they had an older son that was in about the 6th grade and a newborn. So, neither the part of her mom being poor or her not having a dad made sense to me. So I asked her about the one that was a little more obvious. "But you have a dad, right? Wasn't he with you and your mom at conferences?" I asked her. "Yeah, but that's my new mommy and daddy. In my old life, I didn't have a daddy." At that point, I just agreed with her and finished up so that she could get back to her recess. It left me wondering for a little bit as to why she kept phrasing it as her old life. I thought maybe she was adopted, or in foster care, because of how she briefly described her old life, but again, she looked like a spitting image of her father. I brushed it off as kids just being kids and then let it go. But then, another event occurred with her that added more to the story. I had partnered the kids up for a class assignment, and since Sally had become close to this one girl, I put them together. As I walked around to check on all the kids, I stopped at each table as I listened to their process. When I went to Sally and Katie's table, I asked how they were doing, and Sally thanked me for letting her work with Katie. I said you're welcome, and I asked them about their project. After some time, Sally again mentioned how much nicer this school was, and all the kids and teachers. This time I asked her if she remembered what the school that she went to prior was, and without skipping a beat, she told me. It was a saint's named school for girls. I had never heard of this school, and I had lived in this area my whole life, so it seemed to cement my idea that she went to a different school in a different area. I asked her if she knew where this school was, and she said that it was far away, and that people talked differently at that school. I was trying to decide on what to say or ask next, but Sally continued talking for me. I didn't like it there. The girls were very mean to me about my clothes. So I told her that her clothes were very cute, and Katie said that she liked her shirt. Katie was always a very kind girl to everyone, so I appreciated her help. But then Sally explained more. I had to wear a special skirt and shirt, and the other girls had a lot of them, but I only had the one, and it was always dirty. They made fun of me and ripped my skirt. I apologized, and Katie hugged her, and changed the subject, saying how much she liked her and seemed to cheer her up. I again walked away, reminding myself to look up this school when I had the chance. I had written down the name of the school, but after that, it was out of sight, out of mind when you have a class full of young kids. We also have classroom duties, and those selected change weekly. I chose randomly by pulling sticks from a jar, and Sally was chosen to help wipe down all the tables. And this was done before they went to recess. So, as she cleaned them, I cleared the board, and due to our previous conversation a day prior, I complimented her on her outfit. She thanked me, and then thanked me for being a much nicer teacher. I said you're welcome and thanked her for being such a great help. That's when she sat down and started bawling. I immediately went to console her and ask what was wrong, and what she said has always stuck to me. Everybody's so nice here, not like they were in my old life. I was afraid they would all hurt me here too, even you, but you're my favorite teacher. This has obviously affected her, possibly even traumatized her, and I wanted to bring it up to her parents in case they weren't aware of what may have happened to her. As I knelt in front of her, I asked if she wanted to talk about it, and she was more than willing to share. She explained again how she was teased because she only had one uniform that she would wear the entire week, and that the girls would throw stuff on her clothes and her hair, only to make fun of her when she came in the next day wearing the same stained shirt. She even explained how the teachers would always turn a blind eye to the bullying and only told her to stop complaining. Then, she explained how she ended up here. One day, as I was walking to class, the girls started following me and pulled on my skirt. I yelled at them to stop, and I tried to get away, but my foot slipped, and I fell down the long stairs, and I hit my head a lot. When I stopped, I couldn't move and my whole body hurt. And then I got tired and just went to sleep. Then, it was dark for a very long time. But I got a new mommy and daddy, and they're very nice, and they have money, and everyone is so nice here. I was in awe as I listened to Sally's story. I tried my best to hold back the sadness and shock in my eyes, and just told her that I was sorry that it happened to her, and explained that she was safe now. I even told her to let me know if she's ever hurt or bullied here, because I refused to let any of that slide. She cheered up pretty quickly after that, and I dismissed her to go play while I finished up. Still, I didn't quite understand what I heard. Yeah, it sounded like she was bullied, but after a fall like she described, you would think she would have substantial and possibly permanent injuries. Or maybe even have died. And that's when it hit me. I went back to my computer and looked up that school that she'd mentioned. That school did exist. It was an all-girls school for ages 3 to 18, but it wasn't even in the US. Part of me wants to say that I think it was in Ireland, but I might be wrong. But the crazy part about all of that, it had been closed for years, way before she was even born. How would she have known about that school? After our little moment that day, Sally didn't bring up her old life again. She grew into a very happy and playful girl, much like Katie, and she wanted to befriend everyone that came through the door. I wanted to ask her parents about her story to see if she ever talked to them about it, but since it didn't seem to affect her anymore, I didn't feel it was relevant. I didn't want her to possibly relive something if she didn't have to, and since it wasn't interfering with her life or school, I thought it was best to leave it alone. After looking into it more, I've just determined that poor Sally may have still had memories of a past life, and maybe I helped that part of her move on, so that she could have a happier and better second chance at life. This happened many years ago, but it was such a terrifying moment for me that I still remember it vividly. Back when I was about 13 or 14, my family, which consisted of my parents, me, my little sister, and our dog, had to live in a hotel for about a month while our home was being repaired due to flooding. Being a teenage girl at the time, spending most of my time in the same room as my parents was not my idea of fun. Thankfully, I was able to bring some of my stuff to keep me entertained, and there was also a pool so I could go swimming whenever I wanted to. However, it was also a prime opportunity to stay over with friends because they rarely told me no. I wish I would have stayed with someone on this particular day, though. That way I could have just avoided this whole situation. It was a Saturday, and while my dad still worked, my mom was home with me and my sister until she needed to run errands. I wasn't interested at the time with having to go to a bunch of places, as I knew I would probably just get stuck with watching my sister. So I asked if I could stay at the hotel. After a few pleas, she reluctantly agreed, telling me not to answer the door for anyone as she would have the key. Dad left his in the room in case we needed it, since Mom was always back before he got home. She did say that I could go to the pool since I'd been down there to swim by myself before. So, after the list of do's and don'ts, she finally left. I probably stayed in the room for about an hour or so, playing my DS and watching TV, until I started getting bored. Since I could only use the hotel phone for emergencies, my mom had her cell phone and the hotel charged for phone calls. My next plan was to go swimming for a bit. I changed into my swimsuit and put my cover up on, and then left the room with nothing but a towel and the room key. Thankfully, there weren't many people there. There was a woman with her baby and a kid maybe a few years younger than me playing. Then a group of, 4 old people in the hot tub just talking. And lastly, there was a guy sitting close to the back door working on some kind of puzzle book. I had wrapped my room key in my towel and set it on one of the chairs off to the side, hoping that no one would bother it. I'd seen multiple people grab towels from anywhere nearby the towel cart that they kept in there, so I always worried that they would take mine by mistake, and then I would lose the room key. I got in the pool by taking the stairs, which was where the mom and the kid were hanging out, and then slowly walked over to the deeper side. I liked going over there and either just floating around or swimming back and forth to each side. However, the deeper I went, the closer I got to the guy with the puzzle book. And that's how I noticed that he was staring at me. When I would come up for air or just glance over, he was always looking at me, and would just smile. After the first time, though, I stopped smiling back. I may have been shy, but something about his smile was unsettling. I tried my best to just have fun, but that feeling in my stomach was not going away. I think the mom in the pool even noticed as I would look around at anything I could just to stop myself from looking at him. And I noticed how she kept looking past her baby at him. That feeling would then intensify when I noticed the guy stand up and start walking towards the pool. And of all the places to get into the pool, the stairs or the ladder on the deepest side, he chose to stop and sit on the edge of the pool with his feet dangling in it, right where I was. After he sat down, the only thing he said was, "Hey, young lady, mind if I jump in?" The words may have been innocent, but it was something about his inflection and the way that he said it that nearly gave me a panic attack. I was at a loss of words, or even action to take, so I just looked away and swam to the other side of the pool, and then jumped over the edge to get out. My chair was close to the door, so I quickly grabbed it all, and without even trying to dry off or put on my cover, I swung the door open and rushed out of there. I know that I may have already seemed like someone who was in a hurry or something, but I thought I would just fast walk to the elevator to get there quicker, but also not look like I was running away, I guess. I was 14. I didn't know what to do. However, that feeling in my gut intensified more when I heard the pool door open, and out walks this same guy. You just went to get into the pool. Why would you be leaving it and your stuff behind? Tell me that that doesn't scream that he was trying to follow someone. So I picked up the pace and ran to the elevator, jamming the button until it finally opened. But this guy was still pretty close behind me, and now waving and yelling at me to hold the elevator. Like hell I was going to do that. So I started jamming the button to close the door faster. I figured if I could get in the elevator alone, it would be safer than taking the stairs that were enclosed and someone not being able to see or possibly hear me if something did happen. I didn't factor in the odds of him being capable of catching up to me, stopping the elevator, and being enclosed in the metal box with me, which was exactly what happened. My heart was pounding. I stood as close as I could to the door, but with my back against the wall. That way he wasn't behind me and was within my vision. And that's when he started going on about how rude it was for me to not hold the door for someone, especially when they ask you to. He just seemed incredibly angry for something so simple, and also towards a child. It startled me even more. I didn't know what else to do, but I clutched my stuff closer to my chest and remained quiet. When he realized he wasn't getting a response from me, he started asking about what room I was in, and if I was alone, or if my parents knew where I was. This was already causing anxiety to pile up, but then I realized he never pushed a button on the elevator. I did. So now, I was worried that he at least knew what floor I was on. As soon as it stopped and the doors were just open enough to fit myself through, I took off. I was terrified of the thought of him once again catching up to me, and what if he did as I was entering the room? My mom probably wasn't back yet, so I would be alone. So, trying to think fast, I ran as far as I could to the end of the hall and started banging on a random door, hoping for the best. I remember shouting, "Dad, I forgot my key, open the door!" While looking back, I noticed the guy was still coming towards me, but at a slower pace. What I wasn't expecting was an actual older man in his boxers and a shirt to open the door and look at me confused. I, again, was hesitant about running in this room, so I just looked down and softly said, "There's a man following me." I apparently said it loud enough for him to hear, as he walked out of the room shouting, "What kind of grown man is following around little girls?" The creep was standing at a room a few doors down and had just looked over at us. The older man started approaching him and confronted him, again asking why he was following me. when the guy said that there was obviously a misunderstanding. He claimed that he was just trying to get to his room, which happened to be on the same floor that I went, and it must have scared me. I guess I was feeling a little brave, so I mentioned him being at the pool and what he had said in the elevator. The old man actually stuck around and told him that he better go to his room. The creep patted down his pockets and wiggled the doorknob and looked back at us and said, "Oh, I must have dropped my key," and walked off back towards the elevator. I still highly doubt that that was actually his room, and he was just standing by to see what happened. I felt the old man was pretty close to knocking that guy out. After he was out of sight, the man started asking me if I knew that guy and what happened, and while we were talking, another lady and a kid walked out of their room. I assume it was like a grandparents and grandkids situation. They then walked me to my room, which was actually around the corner, about midway up the hall. When I got there, my mom ended up coming back shortly after. I told her what had happened, and she immediately went to inform the front desk. Unfortunately, the only part that I really know about that was that they told my mom they would check to see who was in that room and get back to her if they found out anything. The thing is, we were there for another week, and daily my mom would ask them and they wouldn't tell her anything. They had a bit of an argument at that point, and whoever was there at the time told my mom that it wouldn't make a difference because they didn't actually do anything to me, and they couldn't kick them out if they already paid. This made my parents angry enough that we left that hotel and went to another one for the rest of our time. So, we never did see that creep again, thankfully. I don't know what his actual intentions were, but I try not to think about that stuff. I just avoid being alone in places like hotels, and where there may not be a lot of people or witnesses around from that moment onward. I just hope that he was never able to terrorize another kid like that again. After all of the background, my story is going to get very chilling very fast. I've always believed in past lives, and a large reason for that is because I grew up having memories and dreams of various past lives. I have also done past life regression a few times. I'm an old soul, and since I was little, I've been able to recount at least 10 of them. I've been here many times. The memories are just there. They always have been. They're so vivid and so detailed. One of my most memorable ones in particular was when I was a young girl living in medieval times. For my recurring dreams and memories, I was 15 at the time. I was part of a super wealthy family. We had an estate on top of a hill and grew wheat. It was the largest estate, and a trail behind our large house led to a smaller village. Our wheat field was between our house and the trail that led to the village. Our house looked onto endless landscapes, and it was beautiful. I believe a big land battle was going on at the time. Knights would come by a lot, and I always admired how handsome they were. We were ultra-religious, and I had my own Bible, and it was encased in silver with gemstones. I read it every day. I remember feeling sad a lot. I had a sister who was 17, and I was the ugly sister. I had long brown hair that my mother or maid always braided. My long hair wasn't the ugly part, nor were my brown eyes. But I had small and squinting eyes, a large nose, and uneven lips. My sister had long, dirty blonde hair, big blue eyes, and a perfect face. And she was getting married to the most handsome guy around. Was also wealthy. I remember having a huge crush on him, but I supported my sister's marriage, and my mother and his family had arranged it between them. We both actually vied for him at one point. Our father was out fighting, and it was just my sister, mother, maid, and I. A few weeks after my sister got married, I was walking along the path behind our house when a handsome knight rode by. He was 16. He had light brown hair and brown eyes that lit hints of gold in the sunlight. He stopped his horse, hopped off, and started conversation with me. I remember wondering why he approached me, as I felt like ugly crap, but I went along with it. He asked my age. I said 15. He complimented my dress and my hair. He had the most warm smile. There was just something about him. He then asked if I wanted to take a ride with him on his horse, and we did. We rode through the fields, and we watched the sunset. I remember over time we fell really deeply in love with one another. We wanted to get married. I remember my mother being oddly okay with this. He had to leave for battle and said that he would be back in a week. He promised that we would be married when he got home, and that was the last of the hardships and the battle. I believe the battle was coming to an end. Except, he never came back. News got back to me from one of his battle buddies, and I was devastated. I was so devastated that I actually got sick, and that's how I died about a month later. I know this sounds like some made-up cliché medieval love story, but it's not. I'm 27 now, almost 28, and this past life has haunted me for probably at least 15 years. I felt symptoms of sickness, sadness, every time I dreamt about it or remembered it, up until I met my now husband. Mind you, I have brown hair and blue eyes in this life, and he has dark brown hair, and, you guessed it, brown eyes that light up gold in the sun. This will be important. Well, my husband, who was my fiancé at the time, we got married this June. As an aside, congratulations to you both. Went on a short mini trip for Valentine's Day this past February to a city that I used to live in for a few years. I wanted to take him to the steakhouse that I always used to go to, as it was so delicious. There were many rooms to this steakhouse, and we sat in a room that I hadn't sat in before. As we were sitting in our dim-lit room enjoying our steaks, I looked to my left. On the wall was a row of large pictures and landscapes. Not paintings, but real pictures of centuries-old estates, medieval castles, and stone mills. Everything was from that era. My eyes stumbled upon one picture in particular, and I froze. My heart started beating really fast, and my blood ran cold. On the wall was my house from this past life. Everything to the exact T. Mind you, I had never told my husband about this past life. I looked back over at my husband, who was staring at me so deep into my eyes, and so intently from across the table. He was giving me a look that I had never seen before. The first thing he blurts out, "I've dreamt about it too." My eyes widened, and I almost choked on my steak. What? We've oddly always been so in sync and deeply connected. I always describe our love as one that transcends space and time, so I believe it's why he could tell that I had both dreamt about it and had memories of the place by the way I was looking at it. We don't need to speak to read each other's minds. He says, "Yeah, I used to dream about it all the time." I said, "It was my house in one of my past lives." He then responded, "It wasn't my house, but I was there all the time." I said, "I think visiting me." And he said, "I believe so." He held this stare. I looked at him back straight in the eyes, and in this dim-lit room, his brown eyes were glowing hints of gold. They normally only do this in the sun. And then I put it together. He was the knight that I had fallen deeply in love with. I had always felt such a feeling of 1,000 years of familiarity when we lay down and gaze into each other's eyes. And he had too. We had told each other this in those moments. And for me, it wasn't your normal cliche, wow, we are so close, I feel like I've known you for 1,000 years kind of feeling, but rather we've been through a lot together. We are finally reunited. You're with me again. You came back, and with you, I am home. Kind of feeling. And I never knew why I oddly felt that specific way. And now, I finally knew why. He's always felt the exact same way. We continued talking. I told him what I remembered, and he told me all of his memories. It was the exact same story, except mine was from my point of view, and his was from his point of view. We had lived together. He also told me the way that he died. Someone had sliced his shoulder with a sword during battle, and towards the end of the quick slice, the end of the sword hit his jugular. Now we also know why he lives with chronic shoulder pain. It's the same shoulder, too. Only the front of the house and the left side was showing, as well as the field in the front. So, we continued on about what was behind it and what everything looked like. We just continued with, yep, to each other's description, and that's exactly it. We had remembered what everything behind the house looked like. The trails, the mill house, the wheat field, the height of the wheat field, the village, identically. Once we got back to the state that we live in, I purchased markers and a notepad. I suggested that we both draw out on different pages of what everything looked like, just for fun, for further confirmation. We faced each other so that we couldn't see what each other were drawing, but I noticed that we were both using the exact same colors. Once we finished, we turned the pages around and, what do you know, identical drawings. I knew past lives were real, but this was further confirmation. I fell even more deeply in love with my husband in that moment, and I believe he did too. Our deep connection grew. Now, if that wasn't crazy enough, we were speaking further on past lives that night after the drawing, and he told me that he had dreamt multiple times of being a photographer. The year was 1942, and it was World War II, and he had a memory of traveling a lot for pictures to submit to a newspaper. He said that he was a journalist. He said he had round-shaped glasses. He has glasses in this life too, but not round-shaped. And that his wife had short, brown, curly hair and blue eyes. He also mentioned having a son, a daughter, and then another son. I said while getting even more goosebumps, "That's funny. I did past life regression once, and I was a woman in World War II in the year of 1942. And I worked for a newspaper. My husband had glasses and traveled for photography, and submitted them to me. He was a journalist. I had a son, a daughter, and then a son. And I had brown curly hair and blue eyes." Both of our appearances were mentioned as important earlier, because I had the exact same hair and eyes in our World War II life as I do now, and he had the exact same eyes in our medieval life. It's also probably partially why there's so much familiarity there, apart from the soul connection and matching energetic in-sync frequencies. All we could do was laugh at this point. Another past life together. And I'm sure there's more we have yet to uncover. We've been together through several past lives, somehow making our way back to each other each time, and falling in love immediately all over again. We are two intertwined souls of this universe that somehow let no circumstances keep us from finding our way back together, again and again and again. And I get to be part of something so beautiful. And, at the end of this life, I know that I will be with him again in the future ones. This is going to start weird, but it'll make more sense later. But I've been obsessed with horses for as long as I can remember. But it wasn't in that cliche every girl wants a pony kind of way. This was different. I loved horses in general. Like, they were my favorite animal, and everything I had was about horses. Horse bedding, clothing, themed bedroom, when I was old enough to choose my own, etc. But it wasn't just something like they were my favorite animal. I knew so much about them that it didn't make sense for my young age. An example, before I could really even read, I couldn't stop talking, and I told my parents that my favorite animal/horse was an Andalusian. This was before I really understood what breed or pedigree meant. I just remember, and so do my parents, that for birthdays and Christmas, I would ask them for an Andalusian. Nobody had a clue how I knew about this specific Spanish breed, especially because we lived in the middle of a popular and bustling city, far from any farms and rustic barns. All I knew at that point was urban living. When they asked me why that one specifically, I told them about how I used to own one. They of course would question this, thinking maybe I misstated something, but I would always correct them, saying things like, "No, this was before." Then, there were the times that I would be playing with my toy horses, and I would just stop and sigh. When they would ask me what was wrong, I would sadly say, "I miss riding my horse, Jules." They would look at me puzzled, and tell me that I never owned a real horse, let alone ridden one. So when they would ask more questions, I would respond with something like, "No, not now. This was before, when I was a grown-up, like you." Again, they just thought it was me with a wild imagination. Then there was this time that we went on a road trip. We were driving through western Kansas, with farmland all around us. And while most kids would be bored, it almost felt like I knew the place. Like seeing the open fields and old rustic-looking barns almost made me feel homesick. While we drove through, I spotted a ranch with horses grazing in the sun, and a beautiful barn nearby. The horses, of course, immediately had my attention, and I remember leaning forward between the front seats where my parents were, and excitedly telling them, "Look at those beautiful horses. I used to have a house like that, and a big barn full of horses." I loved reading stories to them and brushing their manes. My parents once again questioned me, and said that we had never lived anywhere other than our current home, and that we never owned horses. I remember not knowing how to explain it better to them, and being frustrated by it and saying something along the lines of, "No, before, when I was a grown-up. I had my own house and a barn full of horses. But then my house was on fire and I couldn't get out because the door was too hot, so I just died there. I was very sad, but now I'm here and I'm okay. But I still miss my horse, Jules." Again, my parents never mentioned or showed anything about fires when I was around that age. I just remembered it. In my dreams, I could remember how hot the flames were and how terrified I was. They had no explanation as to how I would know about something so vivid and intense. And you can bet that that freaked them out a bit too. But one of the more bizarre things happened when we went to a county fair that really cemented it for my parents, that there may have been something more to my story. They had one of those horse riding attractions, Now, I understand that this would be the first time I'd physically touched a real horse in this life. Yet, when I saw them and ran up to them, it felt natural to pet and examine them, as if I were a seasoned vet. I meticulously looked over each of them, and then even gave specific characteristics, giving away what breed they were. The man in charge of the horses even asked my parents if we owned horses because of my reaction, and he was equally surprised when they told him that we didn't. It didn't take me long to choose a horse, and as the man walked over to help me onto it, I was able to jump up and swing my leg over, getting into position like I had done it every day of my life. When I took the reins and the horse started walking, every moment felt natural, like I was picking up where I'd left off from another time, another life. And I remember that as the ride came to an end, I cried. My parents took me home, and that's when they actually seemed to have a heart-to-heart with me. They asked me to explain everything, and I did. I gave as much detail as I could about my home, my horses, people I could remember, everything. They still seemed bewildered, but I could tell they wanted to believe. After about a week or so, they surprised me with riding lessons. And even though I knew and remembered how to ride, I knew this would probably be the closest I would come to horses in our city. So I jumped on the opportunity. Can't blame them for trying. Those memories never faded. As I've gotten older, I've looked into past lives and reincarnation, and I'm quite certain that's what I'm experiencing. But unlike other kids that slowly lose their memories, I never did. I've always had a strong connection to horses, and it's actually shaped my life. I went to university to be a veterinarian and specialized in horses, and I moved to the country. But despite the science and logic that surrounded my job, I always kept this mystical feeling and wondered that there may have been something more, something unexplainable that linked me to those beautiful creatures. I wanted to dig deeper and really find out more about my past life. I wanted to know who I used to be, as some type of closure maybe. To tell myself that I'm okay and that I'm getting a second chance. But I didn't have the slightest clue of where to start. I didn't even know what state I may have lived in, what date or year. And tracking down a house fire without any additional information would be damn near impossible. So, until then, I will live this life, taking care of others' horses, as well as the Andalusian mare that I now own myself. And, as I brush its mane, I question myself and what I've experienced. But then, I remember this innate connection I seem to have with my horse. The strange recollections and the inexplicable knowledge of a life that I never lived. And somehow, deep inside me, I know that I did. After listening to your podcast, I realized that I too had experienced a series of strange events that I couldn't quite wrap my head around to explain. This incident occurred when I was still living in my parents' house about 8 years ago, in 2015. It actually happened a few times, but one instance seemed the most vivid and realistic of them all. My parents' house, situated in a third world country within a bustling city, was rather narrow and consisted of 2 floors. Consequently, we shared a bedroom on the 2nd floor. To provide a clearer picture of the story, allow me to describe the room's layout. The room was nearly square in shape, featuring a sliding door on the eastern wall with foggy glass, enabling you to perceive a person's shadow in the hallway. Upon entering, your gaze would be met by a metal bunk bed. I occupied the top bunk, while my mother claimed the bottom. Adjacent to the bunk bed, My father's bed was positioned at a 90-degree angle. If you were on the top bunk, you could only see the upper section of the sliding door. As for the floor, the lower bunk, as well as my father's bed, they were hidden from view. Given that my father's work frequently required him to travel out of town several times each month, he happened to be away on a work trip that particular night. In contrast, my mother managed a small shop downstairs, so she was usually in close proximity to the house. On occasion, she would come up to the bedroom later than I went to sleep. That night, after completing my homework, I turned off all the lights except for a softly glowing bedside lamp. I then ascended to my bunk bed to chat with my Facebook friends before drifting off to sleep. Well, there was a house rule of prohibiting me from bringing my phone to bed. I remained on high alert, ready to hastily conceal it should my mother enter the room. About an hour later, I discerned the faint sound of my mother's footsteps, followed immediately by the sliding door gliding open and shut. Swiftly, I powered down my phone and slid it beneath my pillow, pretending to sleep. I heard the bed creaking beneath the weight of my mother, accompanied by the rustling of bed sheets. In an attempt to sound drowsy, I inquired, "Mom, why are you coming up so late?" Her response was a mixture of groaning and shifting on the bed, suggesting that she might be unwell or extremely fatigued. Slightly concerned, I sat up to check up on her. However, as I did so, I noticed a faint illumination in the hallway, indicating that the lights on the first floor were still on. "Looks like you forgot to turn off the downstairs light, Mom," I quipped, alluding to her usual annoyance when I neglected to turn off lights in my room. Curiously, she didn't reply on this occasion. Exhaling audibly, I descended from the bunk bed to head downstairs and extinguish the light. As I cast a glance towards my mother, I expected to see her wrapped in blankets, ready with an excuse for the oversight. To my absolute astonishment, however, the bottom bunk was empty. Baffled, I began to remove pillows and blankets in disbelief, but she was nowhere to be found. Simultaneously, I heard footsteps downstairs, accompanied by the illumination of another light. Anxious to uncover the truth, I rushed downstairs to be met by my very much present mother. Her voice fatigued as she asked, "What's going on? Isn't it your bedtime?" Striving to mask my growing panic, I asked, "Were you downstairs working all this time?" She shrugged and replied, "Yeah, I had to finish a commission quickly for a customer tomorrow." Urgently, I then inquired, "Are you absolutely certain you weren't just upstairs?" Amused, she retorted with, "Come on, do you think I have the energy to run up and down at this time?" It was around 11:30 p.m. as I glanced over at the clock. With a nod, I watched as she went to use the bathroom on the first floor. Feeling bewildered, I hurriedly returned upstairs. That night, sleep eluded me, and I found myself repeatedly checking the bottom bunk to verify my mother's presence. While the memory eventually faded, it resurfaced sporadically whenever I recounted ghost stories to my friends. However, the inexplicable occurrences did not end there. On several subsequent occasions, I thought I heard my father's footsteps right outside the door, with a faded shadow, even when he was away. Sometimes the creaking and rustling of the bed sheets in my mother's usual spot when she wasn't there, but no groaning voices unlike that one time. It could be noises in the neighborhood misinterpreted, but as any growing child would, I became adept at identifying individual family members' footsteps, and even motorbike engines. I mentioned it to my mom one time, but she just chalked it up to me having a dream or a sleep paralysis episode. The peculiar noises ceased once I moved out in 2018. This is the craziest thing to ever happen to me, and I live in Baltimore. Just to explain, I say the Baltimore joke because I've seen murders, bodies, kidnapped at gunpoint as a teen, and more. But this messed with my head more than all that. This happened to me and my friend when I was about 17 or 18, and is the only paranormal thing that has ever happened to me. I've been thinking about this experience more and more, and I don't know why. It's so crazy that it's unbelievable, and I wouldn't blame you for doubting it, but people who know me know that I don't lie about stuff. Might be a little bit of a read, but maybe you'll find it interesting. So, here goes. So, living in Baltimore, there is a place called Loch Raven Reservoir, and it's out in the sticks. It's quick to get to, though. Baltimore is weird like that. 10 minutes one way, woods, 10 minutes the next way, the ghetto. So, we would drive out to Loch Raven and smoke while driving the empty country road. While on those roads is a turnoff to a park. It's been a while, but I'm kind of sure that it's Cromwell Park. And it's not the kind of park you think. It's more just woods with trails. And you can only get there by driving. Roads way too small and dangerous to walk. Well, me and my friend went there one night to smoke. It was about 1 a.m. and we were parked in the parking lot, which again is just a few spots for cars made from gravel. In front, behind, and to the right are trees leading to nothing but more woods. To the left, I'm driving, is a field. The field goes a little more than the football field, I would say, and a football field wide until, you guessed it, more trees. Yes, very good. So, we have a CD case that I'm breaking the stuff up on while my friend prepares the blunt. It's pretty dark out, except for some moon and starlight shining, and I just look to my left, and on the edge of the field where the trees start, I see what appears to be someone with the flashlight. It's far away, so I'm not worried about it, and I just say something to my friend like, "What the hell is someone doing in the woods all the way out here at this time?" I continue breaking it up, and when I'm done, I pass it over to my friend. He dumps it and rolls it, and we lay the CD on the dash. While I'm waiting, I look to my left again, and now the light's up in a tree. Not real high, just a few feet. So I comment again. Why is someone climbing trees at this time in the middle of nowhere? He's just like, hell if I know. And then we start to hear some pops going off. Now, I'm like, okay, he's lighting fireworks off. That's weird. The pops keep happening more and more. I had no idea that all hell was about to break loose. I'm looking over there, and the flashlight turns off, and the pops keep going. For some reason, I had a thought, and when I thought it, my stomach got that scared feeling. And I said out loud to my friend, getting the goosebumps thinking about this, "Why can't we see the fireworks going off?" At that exact moment, the explosions got super loud and traveled across the field toward us. Like a string of explosions coming at us. It made it across the field in probably 3 to 4 seconds. The car was engulfed in explosions. I could feel them in my guts like fireworks. The CD case vibrates off the dash, and they're just going off like crazy. My friend, who's been through some stuff in his life, his mom stabbed his dad in his sleep while he was in the next room as a 13-year-old, so he's not easy to scare. But he's in tears, freaking out, begging me to leave, just absolutely pleading. I'm saying no. I want to know what the hell is happening. I turned my car back on because I felt bad for this kid in tears, and I was gonna leave, but it all stopped as soon as the car turned on. I remember him saying that it sounded like a stampede of horses going around the car. The area had fights from the Revolutionary War and redcoats and bluecoats in that area, and it was known for being sympathetic to the redcoats, and battles being fought in the area. I can't say that's what it was, or ghosts, or what, just saying that's what came to mind. I emailed the park 10 or so years later, and I asked if anyone has ever said anything about anything paranormal to them before. And they said no. Not one thing, ever. To this day, I'm left perplexed at what the hell happened that night. It's mind-blowing. I thought only movies had this kind of stuff, but since then, I am way more open-minded. I still believe a lot of people lie, or are just crazy. I hear stories on here where I think, bro, come on, you're full of it or need help, but this is what happened to me. Believe it or not, I don't care, but it's the only thing to ever happen to me. And I felt the urge to tell someone. So, thanks for reading, if you did. I was never really afraid of the dark. Well, I guess at some point when I was small I was afraid of the dark, but I soon grew out of it. I had to grow out of it. I had to learn to not be afraid, simply because life would be way too complicated if I was afraid. I grew up in the mid-north of Sweden, in a small village with old wooden houses. Not too many people lived in the village, and not in any village nearby. Not too many people had ever lived in that village, because the soil is meager and the farming season is short. And the amount of food that can be produced in an area is small and can't support many people. The farming season is short, but the winters are long, cold, and dark. Very dark. Around midwinter, the sun would rise at 9:30 and set at 2 o'clock. It was dark when I left for school in the morning and dark again when I came home from school. There were a few streetlights in the village, around 8 or 10. It was, as I said, a small village. When I came home, it was time to take the family dog for a walk. Quite a long walk. He'd been inside the house for the whole day and would be quite jittery. So, of course, I could walk along the main road beneath the 8 or 10 streetlights, but it was too short and quite boring. And dangerous. Cars are dangerous, and even more so in the darkness. Or I could head out into the forest. It wasn't a big deal. Cars are dangerous. Walking along a road in darkness is dangerous, even under the streetlights. But the forest, on the other hand, it's totally safe. Even in the darkness. Even when I could not see anything. The worst thing that could happen is encountering a moose. They can be dangerous for sure, but normally they aren't. A moose would normally stand by the side of the road pretending it's not there at all. An animal consisting of 600 kilograms of muscles, antlers, and hooves, trying to convince you it's not even there or that it is something completely different. It may be a horse or so. Or, anyway, it's not your problem at all. They might be standing in the middle of the road, angrily stamping their hooves in the ground, but then you'll hear them. But long before that, our dog would have smelled them and reacted very strongly to them, and we would have turned around. That happened several times. Or that I heard something, a creak, a branch snapping, sounds of a creature moving around in the forest, a roar or a shriek of an unknown animal. Of course, I could be afraid of those things as a kid, but darkness itself, no, it didn't scare me. It just sharpened my other senses. And the things that I heard in the forest, they weren't dangerous anyway. They were animals. Normal animals. Deers and moose and foxes and owls. Normal animals making normal sounds. There was never anything spooky in the forest. At home? Now, that's a whole different story. I wouldn't say that I lived in a haunted house. It sounds too dramatic. It wasn't dramatic at all. Let's just say that there was a presence in our house. Quite often it felt like if someone was standing behind your shoulder, looking at what you were doing. Not menacingly, just standing there. As if to make sure that I did whatever I did properly. And the sounds? Quite often one could hear totally normal sounds. A car entering the driveway. A car door closing shut. Footsteps on gravel. Someone opening the front door to the house. It's just that there was no one there. No car in the driveway. Nobody entering the house. Nothing. Our house was an old farmhouse. People had lived there throughout the years. Maybe some of them had left some traces in the building, as if their spirits had been recorded in the walls, in the floor, and in the roof of the house. Like some kind of tape recording, but in timber and wood. But there was nothing spooky in the forest. Why would there be? Most parts of the forest were always empty. No humans had ever lived there. Our village of 30 people was in a valley along a small creek. If you followed the creek to the east, there were a few homesteads. 2 or 3 kilometers north of the village, there had been a small cottage. It was said to have been inhabited until the 1950s. I have searched for it, but I could never find any remains of it. Not too far from it, there was also said to be an elven stone, which is like a stone altar or a place of worship. For worship of what, I'm not really sure. I could never find the elven stone either. An older man in the village had found it once, with some clear evidence that it had been used in modern times, maybe in the 50s or 60s. 1.5 to 2 kilometers southwest of the village, I had found the remnants of a stone-reinforced burrow in the ground, but I don't think it was inhabited all year round. I think it was used for remote farming, or when harvesting swamp-growing sedges, or when herding cattle and goats. Typically, when a place is empty of people, it's because whoever lived there either starved to death or moved to some place where they could eat. Any area where crops could grow would be utilized. But most of the area around the village was barren pine hills, and unless you found a way to eat stones, shrubs, and lichens, and there was simply no place big enough to support a family outside the village before you came to one of the surrounding villages. So, I learned to live by this. If I followed the dirt roads into the forest, I was safe. Even in the darkness, I was safe. My night vision became really good, and the darkness would sharpen my hearing and my sense of smell, and my other senses as well. The ones you use to feel if something is off. We would often venture into the forest, my dog and I. In the winter we stayed on the dirt roads because the snow made it too cumbersome to walk on the small trodden paths, and almost impossible to cross straight through the landscape. If the roads were hard enough, I would often use a small and light kick sled, where you could reach quite high speeds, especially downhill. The feel of that speed was exhilarating as you were so close to the ground, and I enjoyed it a lot as a kid. Many years later, I was a young adult by now. Our dog had grown into a grumpy old man some years before, and one morning he just didn't want to get up anymore. He died later that day. I still enjoyed going out into the forest though, but now I had to go out alone. I felt safe in the forest. If everything else in my life went haywire, I still felt safe and secure and calm in the wilderness among the trees. Far away, in the innermost part of the forest, there was a small lake. I always loved that lake. It looked so beautiful So tranquil, so peaceful, and almost magical. If you ever believed in elves, this is where you would look for them. Or you could imagine fairies dancing in the fogs rising from the lake during early dusk, if you dared to visit it during the nighttime. But I had only been there during summer and autumn, never during the winter. So one evening in late December, I decided to visit the lake, taking a tour on the kick sled to see how far I would get. If there were tire tracks in the snow all the way to the lake, in probably less than an hour. If there were no tire tracks, it would take me longer, maybe 2 hours. And then I might want to turn around a bit earlier. The lake was at a high altitude, so once I was there, I would be able to get back home quite quickly, since it was down hills almost all of the way home. So, I left the house on the kick sled and headed out into the deep forest. Once I got into the forest, it was much darker than I had anticipated. So what, you may say? It was night. What did you expect? Well, the truth is, snow reflects light really well. If there's just a little bit of moonlight, I would have been able to see fairly well, especially as my night vision was really good. I should have been able to see quite well even with just the starlights reflecting in the snow, but there was no moonlight at all, and the sky was cloudy, so there was no starlight either. I can make out where the forest road stretched, where the snow walls at the side of the road were, and I could make out the trees and the tree line against the dark sky, but that was about it. Since I could figure out where the road was and the snow walls on the side of the road, I continued. As I said before, I wasn't really afraid of the dark, even if I preferred being able to see. So, I continued deeper into the forest. I stopped from time to time to listen, to hear if there were any animals around, or something else that I needed to be aware of. I didn't want to crash into a moose standing in the middle of the road, nor did I want to encounter some rally-kale training for rally on what he thought was an empty road. But I could hear nothing. So I stepped up the speed on the kick sled and continued deeper into the darkness and the cold. But suddenly I saw something that I didn't want to see. A light coming from behind me. Was there a car coming from behind? Did he see me? Was he driving fast? Was it some hopeful wannabe rally driver in training? I stopped immediately, but I could not hear anything. I looked behind me. There was no car behind me, and no other light. The sky had a uniform dark anthracite color in all directions. All the pine trees and the firs had the same pitch black color. There weren't the slightest traces of light anywhere. Confused, I turned back. Had I made it all up? Was it my imagination? Well, apparently. I continued my trek into the forest. Suddenly I saw it again. There was definitely a light shining from behind me. I stopped again, looked behind me, but all I could see was darkness. A totally uniform darkness in either direction. If I looked forward, the faint light that I had just seen seconds ago wasn't there anymore, and I couldn't hear anything special. Maybe there was some kind of reflection in my glasses, but it didn't make any sense. There can't be any light reflecting in my glasses if there isn't any light at all. There was no reason for me to stop or to turn around, so I continued. I came to think about it right then. It just hadn't occurred to me before. Maybe nobody had ever lived in the forest, but people still had died here in the forest. I knew about one case just a few years before. No one that I knew, a stranger from town, but how many more? People had worked in the woods for all ages, with forestry, mining, foraging, fishing. Who knows how many of them had died here? Sooner or later, the light goes out for everybody. It might as well happen at work as at home. It might as well happen in the woods as on a field or something else. Then, I saw it again. Yeah, it was definitely a light from behind, illuminating the trees in front of me. This is how it looked. When you're standing on a road in the darkness, and a car approaches you from far behind with its headlights shining in your direction, and on everything in front of you. This time I didn't bother to stop and look for a car, because I knew there wouldn't be any car. I was alone. Well, sort of alone. Don't misunderstand me, I'm not afraid of the dark. Not as long as the darkness stays dark. I'm not afraid of knowing that there is something out there. Something I can hear or smell but not see. I'm not afraid of that. But knowing nothing is out there but I'm still seeing something, it doesn't make any sense. And I don't like things that don't make sense. I strongly believe in the paranormal. Although I don't find it that scary, it's more interesting than anything. I just thought that I would share my experiences from my life. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I moved into a new home, which seems to be a tiny bit haunted, but yeah. Anyways. And sometime at night, I had come out of the shower and left the bathroom. And for some context, my brother's room is at the end of the hall. The bathroom is on the side, so when you turn towards the end of the hall, leaving/entering the bathroom, you can see into my brother's room. As I was leaving, I saw a figure that I assumed to be my brother, just standing there. It spoke to me in a similar voice as well, but something was off about it. All the thing said was, "Hello there." It was odd, so I gave him a weird look and just responded with a confused hello back. I moved away from my doorway and headed towards the steps. When I turned back, it had gone into the bathroom and shut the door behind it. I was just thinking, okay, whatever, he's weird, and went downstairs. Nobody passed me. No one was behind me or in front of me. When I got to the basement to put my clothes in the basket, everybody else was in the basement as well, including my brother, who was in the freezer looking for hot dogs, and he hadn't been in his room for a while. Later I told my mom about the boy that I saw, and she told me that she had seen the balloon that was in the corner of the dining room get yanked down, as though someone was pulling on it multiple times. She said that she was able to communicate to it through the balloon. I don't remember exactly what she asked, but I do remember her telling it that it needed to leave. After that, the balloon didn't move any longer. Although, that's not the end of it. When I was home by myself later at night, I was eating at the dining room table when I heard the sound of someone running down the steps, and then abruptly stopping. I looked over towards the direction of the stairs, and nobody was there. I was scared at the time and called my mom to ask when she would be home, which she said she would be home soon, so I sat and watched TV until she did. Another time I was home by myself, I was again eating at the dining room table when I thought I saw someone running in front of me in the kitchen, back and forth. It could have been my eyes playing a trick on me, or something, but it still scared me at the time, so I went and sat outside for a little bit before going back inside and watching TV to distract myself. When I got older, things didn't seem to happen as much, mostly just things like the sound of someone following me or tapping me while I'm alone. More recently, I was awoken to the feeling of being yanked out of my bed in the morning, which freaked me out, especially even after I was fully awake. and seeing that there was nothing there, but I was still being pulled out of my bed. For some reason, I didn't scream. I pulled myself backwards quickly, and whatever had a hold of me finally let go. After that, I had these nightmares for a week of a woman coming from my closet or from the hallway. She would be dirty, pale, dressed in all white, and she had long, messy, dark hair. She would come to my bedside and sit beside me, and then put her face as close as she possibly could to mine. I would close my eyes, count to 5, reopen them, and she would be gone. I was able to move again, and I would simply go back to sleep each time, until she finally stopped showing up. I'm not sure if it's related, or if I was even dreaming. For more context, the way it started would be me waking up and seeing her standing there or walking towards me. All I had to do was close my eyes and count to 5, and then she would be gone. Another recent thing is when I was outside talking to my mom, we heard the sound of footsteps and something being dragged above us. The room above the porch is my room. We got up and ran to my room, and nothing had been touched, and no one was there at all. My brother was in his room playing a game with his friends online, so it wasn't him either. Me and my mom went back downstairs, and we continued to hear the sounds. And I still hear them sometimes at night, but I just ignore them now. I believe that's all, but I may update if I forgot something, or if anything new happens. And the OP did update the story. I forgot to mention the most recent thing that happened only a week ago. When I was cleaning with my mom, I had to take a box to the basement. I got to the steps, and I heard this weird sound. I looked into the basement, and I saw a figure behind the door with its hands scratching the door. Well, more like running its nails across it to make sound, since there were no marks. As soon as I said something, it quickly moved away from the door. It went to the little room in my basement where I saw it, and there was nothing there. So, yeah. Back in December of 2021, I had a lucid dream of me dying. Now, I want to use the term dream lightly because it was too real. The following is a message that I sent to my friend just minutes after I woke up. Some things have been edited to hide personal information. I just had the most terrifying dream, and I don't know if I'll be able to sleep again for a while. I was in my bed falling asleep when I started coughing a lot, and eventually started to lose consciousness, and felt like I was falling asleep. But it felt different. My arms and hands hurt, and felt like the muscles in them were being ripped from my skin. After I fell asleep, my soul lifted out of my body, and I could see and feel myself die. I floated above my corpse until the morning, trying to figure out what had just happened because I had no idea what was going on. Then, I saw my mom walk into the room, and she tried to wake me up, but couldn't. She started crying and she held me, and then for the next 7 days, I tried waking myself up until my corpse disappeared. I was able to go back in time, experiencing things when I was 4, and with my cousins playing video games in my home country. And then, I was able to experience asking my girlfriend out and dating her. This went back and forth with me trying to figure out if I had really died or if I was in a dream. Like I said, I was trying to wake my corpse up. I, as a spirit, kept appearing on this small bridge as I looked at my entire life through a vision in the sky. Behind me looked like there was a building, or a church being built, and in front of me there was just light. This place was probably purgatory. After failing to wake up my dead corpse, I was able to call a friend and tell them that I was dead and that I was a spirit. I chose my girlfriend and I told her everything that I had experienced. She told me that I've been dead for 4 days and she doesn't know what to do. I tell her that I didn't think I was dead because I felt alive as a spirit, but at the same time felt trapped and was sentient and could obviously communicate with her. I had the opportunity to experience things that I used to do with her, like playing Mario Bros. And watching movies and kissing, but I could only see it through the vision in the sky. I couldn't feel it. I told my girlfriend to tell my friends that there was nothing to worry about and that I was alive and hopefully I could get my body back. No one believed her and they thought she was depressed and going crazy. She talked to my mom about it, and my mom thought that she was on to something. I told my girlfriend to tell my mom only things that I knew, and that's how my mom knew we were communicating. I couldn't talk to my mom at all, but I could just watch my mom and my girlfriend talking through the vision in the sky. After a few more days, I had given up and started telling my girlfriend how I wanted my funeral to be, who I wanted there, and, for some reason most importantly, what I wanted to wear in the casket. I chose a suit similar to the one that my grandpa was buried in. I was on the bridge watching the construction of the building when I see a timer in the sky for 5 minutes. I somehow fly up with no control and was pulled into the vision. Everything went black. I was small. I was about 12 or 13 again. I spawned in these apartments that my parents and I used to live in when we first came to the town that I live in today. The lights were all off, and then I saw my mom on the living room couch crying, and I walked up to her, and she saw me and hugged me. I was able to feel again, but I still felt like I wasn't in my own body. My mom explained how she's happy to see me and that she always believed my girlfriend. I explained to her what's going on and how I've been trying to wake myself up from death. I asked her where my corpse is, and it didn't look like she wanted to answer, but she said it was in my parents' room. I walked over and saw an old pair of jeans and an old t-shirt on the bed. I touched them thinking that I would be underneath them, but I wasn't. My mom came in and told me those were the clothes that I was in when I died. My corpse was actually in the closet. She opened it, and I walked in. I looked to my right and I saw a pair of jeans and shoes propped up on a shelf. I felt them and I was able to feel my legs. I removed and separated the shirts that were hanging in the closet, and I saw my dead body propped up on a shelf like a puppet. My hair was long, I had chubby cheeks, my eyes were slanted. It looked exactly like me when I was about 12. It was a pair of jeans and a blue, red, and white patterned button-up shirt. That part's going to scar me for life. I was just looking at my dead body. My mom walked in and touched my corpse's face, and she told me that she missed me a lot and to come back. And I told her that I was coming back. Then, suddenly, everything turned white. I wake up and I started coughing again, almost choking on my own spit. I was back in my room. My normal room. I wasn't 12. Everything was normal. I sit up from my bed and I burst into tears. I have never experienced anything so real in my life. I've never had a dream that felt like real life, even though I was doing things that I couldn't do in the real world. Has anyone else ever had an experience like this? I think the most scarring part of this experience was seeing my dead body multiple times, and my loved ones' reactions to my death. what makes a town idyllic? At what point does a town cross the line from being dark to becoming dreamy? The truth is, it's a lot more nuanced than simply good or bad. Sometimes the most picturesque of towns can hold secrets that potentially outweigh all the perfect things, if you only knew about them. Longtime viewers of Raven's channel may remember the story I submitted about Greg, the Stain of Hollywood. If not, that's alright. I'll recap the events of that summer. Greg was well known in Hollywood. A nice guy, a great rugby player, generally an all-around decent person who you'd want to meet. Turns out, he was also an active predator and stalker in the background. My friend Matt nearly fell victim to his vile grasp, barely able to escape. After finding this out, we severed all connections between us, our friends, and him. The story spread across the town's youth rapidly, though the names were lost somewhere in the wildfire. A month or so after our last sighting of Greg, we realized something. While we hadn't seen him in a month, he definitely had seen us. The deeply disturbing discovery of him stalking us, or more accurately, Matt, was a gut-wrenching feeling that I will never forget. This all happened around early to mid-2020. Raven read this story on his channel a year later, in 2021. Unfortunately, I wrote it only a few months before some pretty major events. Greg had been arrested for the possession of drugs. I'm unsure what it was, but I've heard it was something heavy. He got beaten up later on by some people in this year. He changed everything about himself. His hair, his legal name, his school, his house, his friends, and even his gender identity. While I've been using the pronoun of he, him up until now, I'll be using the preferred pronouns of they, them. While Greg might be a vile abortion of a human, misgendering them is an insult to perfectly normal, non-binary people. This radical change in identity was likely due to the fact that their own cousin discovered my post about them on Reddit. He told his family, who I can only imagine disowned them. Over the past 3 years, Greg, or Axel, as they are now called, was largely unseen by the people of Hollywood. Whether they moved away or just remained in the shadows of Hollywood is unclear. However, every few months, I'd be told by one of my friends that they saw them. They became a druggie, always hanging out in dark places and doing hard drugs. Every time I was told of a Greg sighting, we still call them Greg so that everyone is on the same page during discussions about them, I would be told of how they currently looked. It seemed like they were constantly changing their hairstyle and sense of style. Whether this constant identity change was a result of Matt and I, or their drug problem, is unknown. This was pretty much the story up until recently. An open-ended cautionary tale about who you decide to trust. But, in the past month, some awful stuff has gone down, which I will tell you now. This summer, in Hollywood, and many surrounding towns, has been nicknamed the Stoner Summer. This is, in case the name is unclear, referring to the fact that almost everyone who hadn't tried weed before summer now had. While I personally had used it recreationally a few times, I was also sucked into it and smoked the divine grass a few too many times. And of course, with weed to smoke comes a place to be. With the blatant illegality of grass, it's no surprise that you need to smoke it somewhere away from people. A very common place was, unfortunately, Glen Lyon. This forest was the breeding ground for Greg to enact upon their despicable desires. It wasn't rare to take a few steps into the forest and smell grass. In fact, I bumped into several people who barely even bothered to find a secluded place. In retrospect, If I found them near where I wanted to smoke, my spots likely weren't any more hidden. My friend, who I'll call Ryan, was already up in Glen Lyon. My other friend Patrick was in Glen Lyon walking his dogs. While I may be friends with both, the two of them are not very close. They come from two very different lifestyles and could never really see eye to eye on anything. Despite this, there was no bad blood between them. They just never really saw each other as friends. They accidentally bumped into each other that day. With Ryan's state of mind, he decided to walk with Patrick and the dogs around the forest for a bit. It was quite late, and nobody else was in the forest. At least, they thought that. A good bit into the woods, they noticed someone with their hood up walking towards them. With the stranger's build and distinctly red-colored hair, both Patrick and Ryan instantly knew that it was Greg. They stopped dead in their tracks, which is likely what caused Greg to stop and look at them. I'm sure that Greg knew that Patrick and I were friends, and I wouldn't be surprised if they knew I was friends with Ryan. Despite the darkness, I was told by both of them that they saw Greg's face, revealing pretty grim teeth, all yellow and some even decaying. What Greg did next still haunts me. They grabbed their knife, which apparently they carry around everywhere, and held it up as if they were going to throw it. Of course, my friends ran backwards. When Patrick looked back, he saw that Greg was still holding the knife, prepared to throw. Patrick flinched as Greg appeared to throw it. A moment later, Patrick looked back to realize they didn't throw it. Ryan looks back and Greg does it again. Greg was pretending to throw this knife at them, likely to scare them. Whatever drugs they were on, they clearly messed them up even worse than they were before. Patrick and Ryan still ran. When I was told of this story, I didn't believe it. A ghost from our past coming back to haunt us? Ryan has a history of making up fake stories, so I thought he was making it all up to scare me. A dick move, sure, but not something unheard of when it comes to this guy. Yet, he persisted on it being true. So, of course, I phoned Patrick, who backed up the story almost word for word. I was disturbed, but I'm not 13 anymore and Matt's not 11. If Greg's back for whatever reason, they're no longer a threat to us. But they are a threat to the younger children of Hollywood. Rowan, a key figure in the original incident, even told me that they sometimes hang out with an 8-year-old boy, and nobody questions it. That's the thing with small, perfect towns, like Hollywood. Bad things are so unheard of that even when the evidence is right there in front of people's noses, nobody bats an eye. With what I had been told, I decided to keep a weary eye out for Greg. A few nights later, I was walking down to my local Tesco's when I saw them. They didn't see me, so I kept my head down and walked into the shop. I prayed that I hadn't been seen. I picked up what I had wanted to buy, bought it, and then left. As I walked down the street, looking around to see if Greg was there, I saw them. They were standing on the pavement that I was walking on, staring straight at me. My heart skipped a beat when I saw them. I turned around and started walking backwards, deciding to go a slightly longer way rather than walk past them. I kept telling myself not to look behind me, but there got to a point where I couldn't control it. I glanced backwards, only to see that they were following me. I broke into a sprint, something I could hardly do considering the amount of weed I had smoked over that week. I could hear them running behind me. Now, I'm a fast runner. I could easily outrun them back to my house. The only issue was that the route I had taken would force me to go either through a normal road or a dingy, slippery river path called Twizzle Bridge. In the dark after a rainstorm, Twizzle Bridge is a death wish. The stone steps are mossy, and one misstep will lead you crashing into the river below. Obviously, then, I would pick the normal road. As I got to the corner that would bring me onto that road, my stomach sank. There was heavy maintenance going on, completely blocking every way to get across. There likely was a single pathway as there normally is, but I didn't see it. It was dark and my mind was preoccupied. Even if the road was inaccessible, Twizzle Bridge was not a viable option. As I ran, I began to formulate a plan. I would hide somewhere until Greg ran past, before sneaking back through Twizzle Bridge. I ran for what felt like miles, yet I knew it was hardly 500 meters. There truly was nowhere to hide. I saw the entrance to a park called Ballymenic. I went there a lot when I was younger, so I knew the paths off by heart. If I was going to hide somewhere, then this would be it. I looked behind me, and I saw that I had at least 50 meters on them. I ran into the park and started running through the trees. I cut my arms at least 50 times, and bumped into at least 20 trees, but despite the pain, I continued running until I was certain that I was clear of them. I heard Greg run into the wooded area that I was in, slowing down. They were looking for me. I crouched down behind a large tree. I relied on the sound of Greg's footsteps to know where they were. And then they talked. "Ollie, stop hiding." They kept walking around. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to talk about what happened. I'm really sorry. I messed up. I just need you to forgive me." There was a remarkable sincerity in his voice, which was overshadowed by the fact that he had threatened my mates with a knife and was chasing me around Hollywood. Once I determined they were walking the wrong way, I slowly crept the other way until I saw the path again. I got onto the path and quietly walked towards the entrance. I looked back to make sure that Greg wasn't nearby, and then started running again. I got to Twizzle Bridge, where I turned my flashlight on and carefully walked down the steps. Once I was out of Twizzle Bridge, I instantly called the police. I had no evidence, which, back in 2020, was the reason we hadn't phoned them yet. Yet I knew that with everyone who had experienced the events as they had unfolded, maybe the police could at least try to do something. An officer came to me, while the rest went to Ballymenic to look for Greg. I told the officer everything from the start until now. I explained every detail with the exception of what Ryan was doing out in Glen Lyon that late at night. The next day, Matt, Patrick, Ryan, Rowan, and I were all brought to the police station just out of Hollywood to ask us questions about what had happened. With all of our stories matching, I think they believed us. I was told that they didn't find them in Ballymenic the night before, but they would be looking for them. It's been a month and I've heard nothing of it, though I nor any of my friends have seen them since. Unfortunately, that's the end of the story. I doubt that I'll ever see Greg again, which is a good thing, but the story isn't just about Greg. It's about people like them who hide in the shadowy cracks of small idyllic towns, lurking around. Greg was around my age now when they first revealed their true nature. Now that I'm as old as they were, it sickens me even more to think about what must have been going on inside their head. Greg is mentally unstable, which was likely worsened by their drug issues. Deep inside is probably still the same kid, who always treated people with respect, played rugby with his mates, knew almost everyone in town, but that kid is dead. Because whatever Greg is now is completely different to that kid. And so, as I finish writing this, I want to ask you all something. How well do you know your town? People have secrets, and small towns like mine are the perfect places to keep those secrets, to either spread rapidly or fade away into obscurity as those responsible for heinous acts carry on living life with no chance of ever being finally and satisfyingly reprehended. Hi. I had an experience when I was a kid, 9 or 10 years old if I recall correctly, and I'm almost 31 now. I wanted to post this here in case someone has this too, or if there is an explanation out there. My life was pretty chill. I was a kid that didn't watch much TV since we didn't have one in our house. I used to play in the backyard with sticks or just visit the neighbors. One day, I remember that I woke up and my mother cooked a fish. I remember that she didn't like to do that because of the eyes of the fish were kind of disgusting, but my father insisted on eating it. I ate with my sister at a little table, and I don't remember what I did next, but that night I went to bed. I shared the room with my parents. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I couldn't believe what my eyes saw. It was me, eating with my sister that same day but earlier. But I was seeing it from the perspective of my bed. It was so weird. My movements, they were all the same. I'm getting goosebumps just remembering the situation. I was seeing myself in movement but in the past. And it wasn't a dream. I got up and ran to my parents' bed and pulled the blankets over my head. I don't know if this is relevant, but after that, I used to dream while awake. I know the difference, and the first thing wasn't that kind of a dream. It was something else. I don't know what, but it was something. If you've had a similar experience, please make sure to let me know in the comments. I live about 30 minutes from the beach, and decided to take a drive there nearing nighttime to help center myself. I've been in a bit of a bad place emotionally, and in general. In the past few months, a lot of big life changes have happened. My longtime partner and I very recently broke up, and this has been the hardest of all. This beach spot is a place that we spent a lot of time together, and with friends, and it felt like a safe space for me. Part of me sees us getting back together down the line, but no matter what I need to try to navigate this part of my life right now. Anyway, I just really connected with this location, and felt really peaceful and happy and hopeful towards the next chapter of my life, which is saying a lot since I've been very depressed. It was around 5 p.m. when I showed up, and as I made my way down the rather long beach path, I saw 8 rabbits, at all distances, in different parts of the crossing sand roads. I counted because I was shocked to see any. For years, I've really connected with the symbol of the rabbit, and have on rare occasions had them cross my path when I needed them to. After spending a few hours on the beach, watching the sun go down and the moon shine, I wrote some intentions in the sand and let the ocean wipe them away. It was beautiful. As I walked down the long path again to head back to my car, I saw 8 frogs, and then a shooting star. I'm just surprised. I've never seen more than 3 of these things at a time. I've always connected with frogs as well. I don't know what's up with these things, and the number 8 specifically tonight, but I felt at peace. I wonder if any of you have any insights on such things. When I was a little girl, about 5 years old, I began to remember being someone else in a former life. I don't remember the details very well, but My mother says that I told her quite a few details, and that she remembers what I said very clearly because it was so odd. Apparently, I told her I lived in a big bedroom with lots of friends, and that we all dressed in the same tan shirts and pants, and that we all slept wearing our underpants instead of pajamas. And I called our home the base. She was bewildered and asked me when this happened, and I told her that it was when I was a man. Now, I was a very girly little girl who loved to wear dresses and play with dolls, so my mother didn't know what to think about these statements. I also told her that I had a gun of my own, and that all my friends did as well. In reality, I had never seen a gun in my life. My family did not own a TV, but one day my mother brought me with her to visit a friend who had her TV turned on. Gomer Pyle USMC was on the TV. My mother said that I was overjoyed. I pointed out the tan uniforms as being my own, the barracks as my big bedroom, and I explained to her that the mess hall was where we had lunch, although I had never heard that term. I then explained to her that the decorations on the uniform indicated rank. I knew that private meant the lowest rank, and so on. My mother was dumbfounded. She kept asking me how I knew so much about the Marines. I just kept telling her I was there. It was just like that. We had no military service members in our family, so I could not have seen pictures or heard stories about life on a Marine base. So, how did I, a 5-year-old girl, know about all of this? I have no logical explanation. I just knew for a fact that I had been there. So, I had something happen to me today while at the grocery store. But first, a little backstory on me so the situation will make more sense. I am middle-aged and was diagnosed with ADHD, spectrum of autism, anxiety, and mild depression. One of my biggest challenges in life is the ability to focus, obviously. I'm oblivious to minor things around me and never pay attention to those things. Just going to pick up a few things gives me massive anxiety, and I find that wearing my AirPods helps tremendously. Well, today I was on my way home to get ready for work, and I needed a few things from the store. My spouse has a standing rule that I text him before I go to see if he needs anything, so I did. He needed 2 fillets of salmon at 2 pounds each, and 2 cans of chickpeas, the cheapest ones. So, I grab what I need first and make my way to pick up his stuff. I got to the salmon and headed to the canned aisle. As I'm walking down the aisle, I see an older gentleman walk towards me. I spent 8 years in the army, so I did what came natural and stepped to the side with my back to the shelf. This is where it gets weird. As he walked by me, he raised his hand and pointed directly at the chickpeas, which just so happened to be the cheapest ones, on sale 4 for $5. This wasn't a hand wave made in jest. This was a direct and intentional point to the chickpeas. I stood frozen for about a minute trying to grasp what had just happened. I came very close to asking him why he pointed, but by the time I snapped out of it, he was gone. Now, there might be a reasonable explanation for this, and I kind of hope that there is. Why else would he point at exactly what I needed? I would have been there for a while trying to locate them. He literally saved me time out of the day at the expense of me saying in my head, "What the hell just happened?" And I'm still in disbelief. If anyone has a logical explanation, I'm all ears. I grew up in a house built around the 1830s in a small town in western/upstate New York. I always had a kind of sense of spirits, but I was young and had a vivid imagination. I would get the feeling that there was something else there, but nothing really concrete to that end. I understand the concept of sleep paralysis, and I've never ruled that out. This happened when I was maybe 12 or 13, and I'm 51 now, and I still think about it. My sister is older than me, and being a teenager, she was out with friends. My parents rarely went out, but this night they did, and I was home alone. I was used to my mom or even my sister walking by my cracked open door to check in on me or to head to the bathroom. I was fast asleep, and I remember someone standing by my door. I woke up slightly but just assumed it was my mom or sister, and then I fell back asleep. Moments after that, I vividly remember a black mass coming in through the door and then hovering over me. I felt pinned down and I couldn't move. Again, I am aware of sleep paralysis. It was so black and amorphous that I could not see through it. Then, it started talking to me, in multiple voices, and in languages that I couldn't understand. I freaked the hell out, and I forced myself to get up. I felt like I had to fight it. It was scary as hell, and I did not like it at all. When I finally got free, I turned all the lights on in my house and grabbed my dog, and sat outside for a few hours until someone came home. Of course, my parents reassured me that it was just a bad dream. But here's the catch. My brother-in-law and sister have lived there for years, and they both felt like there was always something off about that room. I generally always felt solace in my room, and I loved to read and listen to music and practice my guitar or trumpet. It didn't really change after that, but again, I still think about that to this day. I felt like I've been connected to something else, but I was always too scared to even let anything in. It might be too late, but I would like to see if I have any ability toward that end. Maybe it's all BS. I've had other experiences since then, but I generally push it away and think to myself, "You're not welcome. Please leave my space." So, I've been listening to your stories and loving them for a few months now. Your narration is calming no matter how scary the story ends up being, so I can sleep soundly after listening. It's now my nightly habit. Thank you for that. The experiences I'm about to tell you about are about a house I bought with my husband in 1994 and lived in for about 26 years. I'm going to have to put the stories in parts as the incidents escalated into so many over this timeline that it would be too long. Anyways, let's start at the beginning. So, this house was located in a city in Canada. It was in a neighborhood built in the 1970s. The house was custom built on the show home street of the neighborhood. It was one of the nicest, located on a hill that graduated up into a natural reserve. My husband and I were living in a crappy area, and because we had two young children, 2 and 4 years old, we were looking to buy something nicer. We had always dreamed of living in the area this house was located in, especially on the street that it was on, but, of course, the prices were out of our price range. Still, I kept my eyes on the listing for that area, and to my delight, I finally found one that we could afford. It seemed like a small miracle. Houses there sold for $50,000 to $70,000 more than what this one was listed at. It was beautiful. Brick, spacious, stone masonry fireplace upstairs, Victorian molding in the ceiling, a full basement. The couple that were selling said they needed to move soon. The husband had a job in another city. After a brief look around, noting the basement was kind of creepy, and the upstairs seemed too dark, we decided with lighter paint and curtains, we could make it much brighter. We moved in and happily redecorated our dream house, except the basement. Then, the first incident took place. My 4-year-old's room was across from the kitchen. One day she was in the yard playing and I went into her room. She had a box of toys and, near the top, a large toy fire engine truck. It was stable in the box, and had sat there every day without anything moving. But on this day, as I turned to leave the room, I glanced back, and the fire engine literally flew off in midair, about 3 feet out of the box. I was stunned. It didn't fall out, it flew out. I told my husband, but he couldn't come up with an explanation, and neither could I. A few months later, my daughter was downstairs in the basement living room, which we had made into a playroom as well. I was in the kitchen making lunch and heard her coming up the stairs. I went to the staircase and asked, "Are you ready for lunch?" "Who was that lady?" she replied cheerfully. I stopped. "What lady?" "The lady on the stairs," she said. "The one that took my hand and helped me up the stairs." My heart started to quicken. Was someone in the basement? I told her to go to the kitchen and stay there. I grabbed a knife from the counter, my phone, which was a cordless landline, and shaking, I headed down the stairs. I peeked around the first corner into the spare room, but nothing. I opened the bathroom door, nothing. I checked the playroom and the laundry room, and even the cold room, but nothing. Heart still pounding, I went back upstairs and asked her more about this lady. She said that she had brown hair, was wearing a dress, and looked like a mom. I didn't want to scare her as she didn't appear afraid at all, so I told her to tell me if she ever saw that lady again. She agreed that she would, and then happily munched on her sandwich. I told myself at the time that it could have been a guardian angel, as I have heard that all children have one. My husband said that it was just her imagination, but the way that she said it was so casual. I didn't think that it was imagination. Still, I didn't have any other explanation. I didn't know then that things would escalate into absolute chaos in that house, only a few years after. But that story is for another day. Hey Raven, I hope you're doing well, and thank you for reading all the stories I've written so far. You even made my mess of jumbled memories last time sound amazing. I put this batch off while I asked some family for some facts about the incident. For reference, I'm 37, and these stories all took place before I was 9 years old. On to the history. I was raised by my aunt and uncle, and I called them Mom and Dad. My mother had gotten cancer when I was a year old, and had to give me and my sister up. My father was a cheating drunk and couldn't be trusted to raise 2 children, so the state gave us to our aunt. From the day that I started stringing sentences together, I told my aunt and sister of the wolf in the wall. My aunt thought that it was just an imaginary friend, until he started telling me things that I couldn't have known or understood, like, the phone bill is due tomorrow, or Dad is smoking pot in the back of the garage, or even, Mom can't find her car keys, they're under the couch. And he even told me one time where my uncle hid his guns, and that I should never ever touch them. No one knows exactly what happened between me and the wolf, but one day I ran to my sister, very scared, and said that he had attacked me. It's from this point that I do remember. From then on, anytime a wolf howled on TV or someone made a howling noise, wolves that only I could see would come out from the corners of whatever room I was in and surround me, baring their teeth and snarling. It got so bad that anything wolf-related was banned from the house, and my aunt and uncle moved furnitures into all the corners to block the wolves. I went through a lot of therapy over this, but it didn't help much. My fear of wolves persists even today, and I couldn't make a wolf howl sound if my life depended on it. The next story I remember in its entirety, and I confirmed a few details with my aunt the last time we spoke. It was Thanksgiving. I was 5 or 6 years old, and refusing to eat my squash. We didn't know at the time that I was allergic to gooseneck squash, and I kept telling my aunt that it made my tummy feel funny. We had a don't waste food rule in the house, so I was sent to bed early. The whole family was there, so I climbed into bed crying from the embarrassment. I had just settled in when I heard a voice under my bed saying my name. One of my other uncles liked to pull little pranks on me to cheer me up, so I asked, "Uncle E, is that you?" But the voice just continued saying my name. Realizing that it couldn't be my uncle, I asked who was there. That's when a huge creature rose next to my bed, inches from me. It looked like a wolf or a dog, half rotten and covered in warts, but it stood on 2 legs, wore a cloak, and had 2 massive leathery wings on its back. Also, its hands were that of a human, just warty and gnarled, with claws instead of fingernails. It leaned over me and said, "Come with me." I asked where, and it just told me again, "Come with me." A little more insistent and loud this time. I asked it why, and it said once more, "Come with me." This time very loudly, and offered me its hand. I screamed, "No!" and smacked its hand away. And then I screamed, "Help! Mom? Dad?" The thing quickly bared its fangs and grabbed my arm. I blacked out. I woke up in the morning with my arm hanging off the bed, but I was still in my room. I had a large burn on my arm where that thing had grabbed me, and I had to be taken to the emergency room. As for the details from my aunt, she remembers hearing me scream no, and calling for help, but thought that I was just throwing a tantrum. My Uncle E offered to come check on me, but was told not to when my screaming suddenly stopped. They thought I had just given up on the tantrum and fallen asleep. It wasn't until the next day that my aunt was worried. She reasoned with myself that I had burned my arm on the stove, or the oven, and that I'd covered it up with my sweater. But it never sat right with her as the burn wrapped around my forearm. It wasn't until I brought it up that she realized why that reasoning didn't fit. The last story that I have for you today is on a much kinder note. After that Thanksgiving, I became very afraid of the dark, and would often climb into bed with my aunt and uncle when I was too scared to sleep. Their solution was to buy me a carousel lamp. It was just a light bulb on a short base with a thin plastic carousel that rotated around the bulb when it heated up. It would light the room and project pictures onto the wall. One night, I got in bed, turned on the lamp, and rolled over to watch the pictures when I heard a woman say softly, "Open the window." It was almost a whisper, but she had a kind voice that I didn't recognize. I asked who she was, and she said, Open the window. Again. I looked out the window and didn't see anyone or anything, so I opened it. She then said, "Good. Now, sleep well and good night, sweet Quinn," like a mother would say to her son, and I quickly drifted off to sleep. I woke in the morning to the fire alarm. My uncle rushed in the room, which was full of smoke. The carousel had shrunk, wrapped around the bulb, and caught fire. He threw it and the blazing curtains out the window and then carried me running out of the room. Once he caught his breath, he asked, "Why was the window open?" And I told him, "A nice lady told me to open it." He told me it was a good thing that she did, but reminded me of stranger danger. I told him that I couldn't see the lady, but I don't think that he believed me. I know, though, that whatever or whoever she was, she saved our home, and possibly our lives that night. Had the window been closed, it would have been held closed by a hand screw that my uncle wouldn't have been able to reach to open it, and the fire would have spread to more than just my curtains. Thanks to these events, I know that I am not alone, and that not all things that go bump in the night are scary or evil. Just like people, there are some bad apples, sure, but sometimes they're just there to watch you and keep you safe. And thank you again, Raven. I have lived a pretty mundane life with very little of the paranormal or supernatural in it. I've never even experienced sleep paralysis in my life. I'm 35 now. My father, on the other hand, is very prone to such things. So I will share some of his experiences as well. Also, I'd like to post a quick screw you to everyone who posts hoaxes, exaggerations, or other embellishments to this sub. What little I do have to post may sound mundane, but at least it's 100% true. 1. The giant snail. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing at my grandmother's house. The house would later become ours when my grandmother moved to a better location. One evening, around dusk, I go out on the porch and see the most ridiculous thing. A giant pink snail. Its shell was at least a foot high, and it was chugging along the porch like a regular snail. It was plain as day, and about 10 feet from where I stood. It looked like something from that old Dr. Dolittle movie. I got extremely excited and stuck my head back inside to tell my grandmother what I saw. But to my disappointment, when I looked again, 1 second later, the snail had vanished. There were no signs of it. No snail trail or anything. It's possible that I hallucinated, but I've never hallucinated anything before or since, as far as I'm aware. Number 2, the dog driver. My father was an over-the-road truck driver. He drove an 18-wheeler all over the USA and parts of Canada. During the summers, I would go on the road with him. His truck had bunk beds. It was a rainy day in 1998 in Pennsylvania. I remember because advertisements for the movie Godzilla were everywhere. My father was in the back in the sleeper taking a nap, and I was up in the passenger seat playing my Game Boy and looking out the window. I was looking over at the truck parked next to us when I saw something that instantly made me sick to my stomach. It looked to be a human man with a dog or wolf snout. He had grayish normal hair on top, kind of spiked up with some wax or gel, but as my eyes went downward, I saw the snout. I freaked out and jumped back in the sleeper to wake my father up. When we looked again, there was no one up front in that truck, and the curtains were pulled on its sleeper. I had difficulty going into the truck stop we were parked at because I was afraid that I would encounter the dog driver. Later on in life, I tried to rationalize it as me seeing a driver and his dog, and in the rain I somehow mistook them for one being, but that really is not what I saw. And I doubt that it would have made me sick to my stomach if that's all it was. 3. Dad's first UFO. It was around 1975. My father and a friend were out walking in rural Alabama. They reached the top of the hill, and down in the valley below, they both see a stereotypical flying saucer, silver, hovering above the ground in the valley below. My dad's friend wanted to go check it out, but my father quipped that he wasn't ready to go to Mars, and insisted they get out of there, which they promptly did. 4. Dad's second UFO. In the early 90s, my dad was driving his 18-wheeler through Arkansas and saw another flying saucer come down from the sky, hit the ground, skid across a nearby field, and come to rest against a fence. My father gets on the CB radio and calls out to every other driver in the area and says, "Hey, did anyone else see that flying saucer hit that fence?" Another voice comes on and says, "Yes, we'll take care of it." My father kept driving and didn't look into it any further. 5. Dad's third UFO. This third sighting happened, once again, while driving his 18-wheeler through New Mexico. This one looked more like a ball of light. It shot out of the sky and hovered above his truck at equal speed to him for some time, before breaking off to the right and zipping out of sight. 6. My only UFO. I only have one UFO experience to speak of, and it's not much of one. My dad was mowing the yard at our home in Alabama. He calls me outside and says he wants to show me something, so I go out, and he tells me to look up. Far off in the distance, I see what appears to be a black cube, or something shaped like the Sandcrawler from Star Wars. It's very tiny since it's so far away. We stand there and watch it for around 20 minutes. It just floats in place. Occasionally, what appears to be vents on the right or left sides would open or close, appearing to help stabilize it as it floats. Eventually, we got bored of watching it and went inside. I didn't believe it to be a UFO at the time, and figured there must be some other explanation for it. In retrospect, I'm not sure what it could have been. It could have been a weather balloon, but I've googled pics of those, and this was different, because it was black and cubic in shape. I saw no round balloon shape holding it up there. And 7, Dad meets Jesus. On another truck trip, around 2001 in upstate New York, my dad is driving through the woods at around 3 a.m. He gets out of the truck to relieve himself and notes that there is a dense fog all around the ground, and the clouds in the sky were unlike any he had seen before. They covered the sky like a dense white carpet. He was creeped out by this, but exhausted, so he found a place to pull over for a nap. During the night, he wakes up to see someone sitting in the passenger seat of his truck. Assuming it's an intruder, he sits up and rears back his fist to punch them. The man leans forward and, in the light, appears to be Jesus. He extends his hand, and this causes my dad to lay back down onto the bed against his will. Then, this Jesus comes forward and touches this place on my dad's leg, which he'd had biopsied a week prior due to a cancer suspicion. That's all my dad remembers before waking up. He would later be diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma, and survived it, in the lymph nodes of that same spot. This encounter is explainable as sleep paralysis, But one element that suggests otherwise is the fact that my dad claimed he could move around at first, balling up his fist and trying to punch the figure. It was only afterwards that he was forced to lay back down. Then it becomes more like a typical account of sleep paralysis. I do not think, if it was an entity, that it was benevolent, or actually Jesus. After all, it's not like it healed his cancer by touching him, which you would expect. This event occurred in August of 2008 in Charlottesville, Virginia. I was relocating to the area and starting a new job there. The company set me up in a local hotel room for the first week until I could move into a permanent apartment that I had already signed a lease for. I had settled into my room for the night and was asleep for several hours. During the night, I woke up feeling thirsty, so I sat up in bed and grabbed my bottled water from the nightstand to take a drink. I was sitting straight up in the bed in the dark and placed the water bottle back on the nightstand when suddenly I heard a buzzing sound in the room. I realized it was getting louder and coming right at my head. Before I could react, something buzzed right around my head and then continued flying away from me. I was completely shocked. I thought it was some kind of bug, so I turned on the light but didn't see anything at all. I walked around the whole room looking for anything that would explain what I had just experienced. It kind of sounded like a big flying bug, but at the same time it also sounded like an electronic remote control device. But since it was dark, I never saw anything. I just heard it buzz around my head and then it was gone. After a while, I couldn't find anything and I knew that I had to get my sleep to start the new job in the morning. I stayed in the hotel room for the remainder of the week, but did not experience anything else. Looking back on it now, I think that I must have suppressed this memory for years, because I couldn't explain it, and I was too focused on the new job and moving to a new location. To this day, I have no idea what that thing was, but it seriously freaked me the hell out. This poster left 2 stories. Story 1. I'm a Titanic enthusiast. If there are any exhibitions on, I will go and view what's on show. When I went and watched the film, more than once, I came out so angry at what allegedly happened. To this day, I think I was on that ship in a past life. Before I go on, condolences to the families of the people lost in that mini sub accident. There, for the grace of God, go, because if I won a lot of money, I would spend it to go to see that wreck. Anyways, a few years ago, whilst in Las Vegas, the exhibition with The Big Piece was on at the Luxor. So, off I went. I got my ticket and I went. Now, I'm used to air-conditioned buildings, but the second I walked in, it just gave me the creeps. The longer I stayed, the worse it got. I was really glad to get back outside just to get the chill out of my bones. Story 2. I had cause a few years ago to go to Los Angeles. A couple of times on my trip, I went to Long Beach and did the Queen Mary tours. Well worth the money. Upon finishing both the normal and ghost tours, I wandered out onto the deck. The second I was there, it felt like someone was standing right behind me. I glanced back, but of course there was no one there. The feeling got worse and worse, so much so that I nearly ran off the ship. We stayed at Lake George Battlefield Campground, and our last night camping was July 16th of this year, 2023. Right after midnight, my friends went to use the bathroom and left me alone by the fire when I heard a woman's voice singing in the woods. It was spooky, but also dreamlike. I describe it as singing because it sounded so practiced, but it was arpeggiated notes, no words. I would also describe it as sad and possibly ritualistic. Startled, I tried to record it because it was definitely audible. I figured if my own ears could pick it up, so could a mic. No chance. I responded with vocals of my own and then asked who was there. No response. My friends returned about 10 minutes later and the singing stopped as I heard their footsteps approaching from the road. They told me it was bullfrogs. The pitch changes and lengths of the notes. There was no way it was a bullfrog or a forest animal. For reference, the campsite that we stayed was 200 foot south of the Isaac Jogues Monument. There's a nature trail about 400 foot west, down the hill from our site. In front of the nature trail is the Tiki Hotel. We can see those lights through the foliage. I'm really thinking it was someone practicing some Native American ritual. We've stayed at the same campsite every year for the past 5, but this was our first time staying into Monday morning. Would anybody know what goes on out there on Sundays? Hello, fellow Redditors. I found myself lurking and reading posts here from time to time, but it seems that I may finally have an experience of my own to post about. I'm not quite sure what to make of this, but last night, my husband and I were in bed trying to go to sleep. As it's quite hot where I live at the moment, I've been having a harder time getting to bed. He usually falls asleep quite quickly, so he didn't hear what I thought it was faint twinkling music, similar to an ice cream truck. I wasn't too concerned at first, as we live in a noisy area, but as I tried to focus on the sound, my inner ear began to feel in pain, as if there was immense pressure. I kept listening as I was confused as to what was happening. At no point did it get louder. At one point, it went away completely, leading me to believe it was someone just playing music on a hot night. Then, it came back, and my eardrum felt even more inflamed, and I felt the pain growing in my head. I covered my ear, but the pain didn't help much. At this point, I felt quite scared. I watch a lot of horror films, so my imagination tends to get the best of me. I yelped, partly in pain and partly in fear, and I woke my husband up. He groggily asked if everything was okay. I told him my ear hurt, but he went back to sleep almost immediately. I didn't hear the music anymore, but I turned and I covered my afflicted ear with the pillow. My other ear was unaffected. I was able to go to sleep just fine after that, with my ear right up against the pillow. So, yeah, it's a quite mundane thing, but still has left me scratching my head. My ear is fine this morning. I have a bit of a headache, but that's it. Has anyone experienced anything similar? Is this just tinnitus and I need to see a doctor? I can't imagine why it would be, but I'm trying to find a logical explanation for this. A while back, I posted a story on here about my dad being followed home by duendes when he was a kid. You guys really liked it, so I figured I would share another story. 3, actually. As it turns out, my mom, dad, and cousin each have a story that takes place on the same patch of road in Mexico. I'll tell them as they were relayed to me individually. My parents actually met here in the United States, but they grew up in neighboring pueblos in Mexico. Connecting the two pueblos is a long, empty span of road, maybe 5 miles long, which is apparently haunted. These stories take place many years apart, but on the exact same patch of road. First, my father's horse is distressed. When my dad was a young man, he loved horses, jaripeos, and drinking. While he has since put down the bottle, he still loves horses and jaripeos. But back in the day, he would occasionally ride his horse out across the road to the neighboring pueblo to hang out or hit up some parties. One early morning, he was returning home on horseback from a party in the neighboring pueblo. He was a bit drunk and was just casually making his way home when suddenly the air grew still and the night went silent. He said that something just felt off and his horse could sense it as well. My dad says that you can always tell what a horse is focusing on by looking at their ears. And in this case, my dad's horse's ears were perked up stiff and focusing at the empty field beside them, as well as all around them. Thinking that there may be some sort of animal stalking them, my dad looked around, but the fields beside them were empty, and there weren't any bushes or things for an animal to hide behind. Suddenly, the air went cold, and my dad felt goosebumps on the back of his neck, almost as if something was right behind him. And that's when my dad's horse couldn't take it anymore and took off running for its life. My dad held on tightly and tried several times to bring the horse to a stop, but it was dead set on getting the hell away from whatever they had just encountered. Eventually, they finally reached their pueblo, and the horse calmed down and came to a stop. Never before or after had that horse behaved that way, and it left my dad shook up. Needless to say, he was sober by the time he reached home. Second story, my cousin's passenger. My cousin is a few years older than me, so this story takes place many years after my dad's. One late night, my cousin was driving my uncle's pickup truck. He didn't make any mention of where he was heading, or in which direction, but he said that he was making his way across that same stretch of road. He said that when he was driving along, and all seemed very calm, when suddenly he felt a presence in the vehicle. This pickup truck is one of those older two-door pickup trucks, which have a single long bench-style seat for the driver and passenger. My cousin says that he felt the passenger side of the seat sink in, as if someone suddenly took a seat beside him. He said that the experience scared him stiff, and had him so shook up that he was cold sweating and crying, thinking that this might be the moment he was going to die. Instinctually, he dared not turn around to face whatever it was that was sitting beside him. But the presence was so real, and he could even make out some sort of silhouette there beside him through his peripheral vision. After a couple of miles of panic and sobbing, he eventually reached the neighboring pueblo and the presence gradually faded away. He made it home safe, but the experience has scarred him. And third story, my mom and cousin spot a hitchhiker. This last one is short, and actually only took place a couple of years ago. This happened to my cousin from the previous story, and my mom. A couple of years ago, my mom visited Mexico to hang with family. Her return flight home was in the early morning, so my aunt had my cousin drive her to the airport. Along the way, on that same patch of road, they spotted a man hitchhiking on the side of the road. This was a very strange sight, as not many people hitchhike along that road, much less early in the morning before the sun even comes out. As you might deduce from the last couple of stories, land around that road is largely empty. There's not really any good reason to be out there at that time. Jokingly, my cousin suggested they pick him up. Everybody in the car nervously laughed it off, and they drove past the man. As they continued along, however, they swore that they could hear someone whistling at them from out in the empty fields. This made them all very nervous, and wondered if the man, whatever he was following them. Eventually, they reached the neighboring pueblo, where they also swore they spotted him standing just outside the entrance. So, I've always brushed off paranormal activity as coincidence. Or I've tried to find rational reasoning, even though I've always been intrigued by it. But lately, I have no way of explaining it to myself. For some background, I've recently moved house. I used to live in a big old manor house. I'm not sure what year it dates back to, but it's next to its twin, the main house, which dates back to 1781. So, I'm assuming it's around the same time frame. Obviously, with a building this old, it's very daunting, and you would assume that it's haunted. It also got turned into an old people's home at some point, but anyways, I've recently moved into another house that dates back to the 1800s. While I was in the manor house, me and everyone else living there would experience weird things. Nothing dangerous, but weird nonetheless. And we would all brush it off as it's an old house. And I was a kid. Things that would happen frequently, doors closing and opening, electronics and light bulbs turning off and on, doors locking, and loud noises coming from inside the bedrooms. Like banging noises. I don't want to drag this on longer than it needs to be, but I have a lot of experiences in that house. So if anyone wants a more in-depth explanation, feel free to ask questions. But to the point. I've always had extremely vivid dreams that feel and look real. To the point where when I wake up, I still believe that I'm dreaming. Since moving to this house, the same things are happening. Lights turning on and off, etc. We had a weird experience with our Alexas playing music randomly. Old-timey music. But the thing that's making me feel crazy is the dreams. Just before I fall asleep, I keep hearing a man speaking in my room. As if he's next to me, it's that clear, but I'm always on the verge of sleep, so I just brush it off as a dream. But what really got me was a phone call the other day from my mom whilst I was out, asking me where I was. I'd been out all day, and it was 2 a.m. by this time. She called me and told me that she had called out my name when I got home, and I responded. And that she had a conversation with me. But it wasn't me because I wasn't home. She realized when she went into my room that I wasn't there. So, I need help. And opinions. A few nights ago, I was out late at night with my family and some friends. It's really smoky out, and I looked up and noticed a relatively bright star in the sky. About like Vega in brightness. I'm into astronomy, so I looked at it for a while, trying to see if I could identify it with my star app on my cell phone. And that's when I noticed a couple of odd things. The star was moving. Not in a straight line like a satellite or airplane. It was staying in its same little patch of sky. But it was also moving in a random pattern, and at random speeds. Sometimes very slow. Sometimes it would stop. Sometimes it would shoot very fast. It wasn't wiggling a little bit like atmospheric distortion, it was moving a significant distance. I pointed it out to the people I was with, and we all agreed that we saw it move. Also, it wasn't appearing on my star map. The other people I was with identified 3 additional lights doing the same thing. Also in the sky, there were normal stars that weren't moving and weren't as bright. After I watched for a good long time, I realized that they were also pulsing light seemingly at random. It would flash slightly and illuminate the clouds around it, so it was inside of the clouds. Sometimes only a quarter would flash, sometimes it would light up the clouds around it all the way around. I watched them for about an hour until it was time to leave, and then drove an hour away. They weren't in the sky at my house, only at the location where we originally saw them. This is the second time I've seen something like this, but this is the first time that I've had a whole crowd with me to acknowledge what I was seeing, and to watch it with me. So, this was 6 years ago. I was 12 and I had just gotten back from school and I had my lunch and was watching TV because that was a thing for me back then. My parents were out and my grandma was sleeping in her room. Randomly, my peripheral vision picks up something from the room next to the TV. I tried to ignore it because, well, I was trying to enjoy my favorite cartoon. And soon I felt something move in the room. My eyes turn and meet the teeth of a person. I try to see what or who it is, and all I see is a black figure smiling at me with its teeth wide open. It was a woman, by the looks of it, and I for one was shocked and couldn't really move. I was frozen. I kept looking at it for a solid 5 seconds, and when she started moving towards me, that's when I was like, screw this crap. I got up, ran towards it, and slammed the door shut and ran into our backyard. I couldn't get myself together. I couldn't breathe. I kept staring at the house, checking every door and window to see if something was following me. When I finally calmed down, which took about 10 minutes, I went inside. The door was still closed, so that was a good sign. I went and checked on my grandma, who seemed to be still sleeping. I wanted to wake her up, but I just couldn't. I don't really know why. I just sat in front of the TV, staring at my favorite show, trying to ignore the fear and everything that had happened, and just praying for it to be a nightmare. But it was real. After a while, my parents came home and I felt safer, and I called my friend and told him everything. I strangely forgot about the incident, I don't know how, and I never told my parents about it until a month ago when a horror movie triggered the memory of the figure with teeth, or whatever it was. My parents refused to believe it as I hadn't told them about it for 6 years, and they believed that it was a dream. But my friend remembers it, and it was very real. I never saw anything like that after that day, except for a strange night last week. I'll tell you all about that in the next post. I believe it to be a spirit. I don't know what kind, but it was something. I tried to rule it out as a hallucination too, as kids tend to hallucinate sometimes. But yeah, that's my story.